Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for those of you who are on the West Coast. My name is Shannon Biggs. I'm the co-founder of Movement Rights and really pleased to be organizing today's webinar with Jennifer Falcon from Indigenous Environmental Network and Bryan Parras from the Texas Environmental Justice Organization T.E.J.A.S and Sierra Club, and Iris Rodriguez from Xica Media and Xica Nation, who is currently in Mexico and may be having some trouble with her internet connection. So she's right now currently joining us by telephone. So would love to just welcome all of the panelists. And today's topic, as we know, very excited to be talking about the virtual fireplace and organizing in these times. Oh, look, there's Iris. Hello. Maybe all of you could just say a quick hello, and I'll mute myself.
I guess I'll start. Hi, everybody. I am Jennifer Falcon from Indigenous Environmental Network. I am our communications coordinator. I am a member of the Fort Peck Assiniboine Sioux tribe, but I also have roots in Fort Belknap with the Nakota tribe in northern Montana. Check.
Go ahead, Iris.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I'm Rodriguez. I'm from T.E.J.A.S, and I won the Somi. But for the past several years, and Xica Media is a family-run business, as you can see. So my kids are also joining us for this call. It's nice to be with you.
Thank y'all. And it's Bryan Parras. I'm in Houston, Texas, and I currently work with the Sierra Club, and I'm part of the Healthy Communities Environmental Justice Program, and I'm also a co-founder of T.E.J.A.S, a grassroots environmental justice organization here. And happy to say, like, I remember meeting Iris almost 2 decades ago. Man, we're getting a little up there in years now, but giving a presentation in Houston, and I think she was probably one of the first folks that I remember hearing do like authentic environmental justice work based on her own personal experiences and places that she grew up in. So just happy to share the platform and the space with Iris. And of course, Jennifer, we met out in the streets, always. Oh man, so many awesome folks I've met out in the streets protesting and, fighting for our rights, trying to protect our families and communities and so on. So just happy to be here with both y'all. And of course, Shannon, thanks for putting this together. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I think especially at this time, while we're all cocooning and sort of thinking about, well, how does our organizing continue? And not just today, but in the sort of new reality that once the doors sort of open back up after lockdown, what does that look like? So my goal is to just this is just going to be a conversation with the three of you, and also for folks to present questions in the Q&A or in the chat. And I'm going to mostly disappear. And so I just pop up from time to time and listen and learn with everyone else. And so my first question is how COVID has affected our organizing. And so maybe we'll start with Jennifer and just start the conversation. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I can talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted organizing for Indigenous Environmental Network and the networks that we work with. I know especially for the KXL and things like Line 3, fossil fuel and oil and gas companies have really used this as an opportunity to push through construction, particularly with the KXL, because Indigenous people are so worried about protecting our elders and our communities that we are really practicing social distancing and staying in place and sheltering in place. So definitely there's been an impact, and we've had to switch a little bit more to digital organizing to call out the KXL and apply pressure on TC Energy as they push through construction, particularly in Montana. We've been trying to apply pressure to governors of states who are allowing the KXL to go through, because we know that construction brings these transient workers to our communities, particularly rural Indigenous communities who don't have access to healthcare and are already working within a infrastructure that barely works for us as it is. So it's been hard as tribes lock down and really try to protect our people, that we see this extractive industry pushing through in our communities because they see that it's a good time to push through construction. There was a group that has actually held a protest at the KXL pipeline in northern Montana along the border, and they wore masks. They were practicing social distancing and keeping 6 feet away from each other. But we noticed during this protest that the KXL workers that we were promised would be also following these same COVID regulations were not wearing masks, and in fact were not practicing social distancing, which is so scary because they can so easily bring this illness into our communities in Montana. So having an influx of people has definitely been scary. We've been pivoting to online organizing. We've also had to pivot to organizing for the stimulus bills and trying to get frontline people and communities of need into these stimulus packages that the government is trying to pass right now. We're working on a 4th stimulus package because we know that $1,200 just simply is not enough for people to get by. We know that the average rate of even just an apartment is $1,000 in many communities. So $1,200 just does not cut it. And we have these big bailouts going to oil and gas, but we are not taking care of our workers and our people on the ground.
Thank you. Bryan, what are your thoughts? Bryan, you're muted.
Sorry. I thank you for reminding me. I just started chatting. I wanted to hear from Edis, but I did have a story to share, and maybe that's a good segue into Mexico. And it's a story I remember my mom telling me, because she's always had these incredible stories that have helped like me develop my creative skills and just believe in magic and the wonders of the universe. And I remember her telling me this story about her visiting her mother when she was sick. And her mother grew up in West Texas. My mom's from West Texas, and they were in a little farm right in the middle of the Permian Basin. So, I'm thinking of the landscape that Jennifer just described. That's where my mom grew up, but in Texas. And her mother, my grandma, got sick. She had kidney issues and was on dialysis for like 10 years. And my mom had moved to Houston, where I was born, where I'm raised, and still am now. And she told me these stories about how she would communicate with my grandmother, but not by the phone. and not by driving over there, because it's 9 hour drive from Houston to West Texas. So you can imagine the difficulty of just going to see someone. So what do you do? What are ways that you can communicate with someone if you're not there physically in person and you're not using the phone? Well, now we have like internet and things, that we can video conferencing. But she used to tell me that she would travel in her sleep to go visit my grandmother and go check on her, and that her mother would meet her, like, and they would have conversations and communicate and talk in her sleep. And so, I always, as a kid, was like, come on, Mom, that's BS. I don't believe it. But I was also intrigued, and just fascinated that that was something that was even possible, that you could even imagine that, or that my mom, of all people, would be telling me that that's what she did. And she did. She totally did. I believe it now. But that's all the internet is, right? It's utilizing, the same waves and the information that that we are communicating with each other with. It's always been there. It's always been there. So when we were thinking about doing this, Shannon, and you asked me about it, I was thinking about, those very ancient ways of communicating, and thinking how indigenous peoples all over the world have always utilized nature, right, to communicate. And I know in Mexico, fire was a big way of communicating, across the entire region. And there's so many other examples, but I just wanted to start there and honor, my mom and my grandma for putting that spark in my head of just imagining these, otherworldly kind of spaces and ways and modalities of communicating with each other. And I'll leave it at that. You're up, Iris.
Hi, thank you for sharing that. That's funny that you mentioned those things, because it was a perfect segue. So I have been walking with the blue light since it went to the public. I was 9 years old when I first met the internet. And when I was 22, I began using the internet to do social justice and community work. And then in 2012, I started using the internet to do, to contract as an independent contractor, and just building websites, doing media projects, digital strategizing. So I've grown with the internet. I remember the time before the internet. And I feel like the past 20 years, it's sometimes been a struggle to convince people of the importance of this medium, right? And so sometimes I'll be like, gosh, I got to put it together and add, because I sustain my family through this work, right? So I try to work with open and positive people doing positive work in the world. And so I said to myself, gosh, I gotta sell internet, I gotta sell websites, I gotta do something, so I put together ads and try to explain, wanna own your information, wanna make money from home, always come up with a selling point. And this year, everything changed. It was overnight. Everybody showed up at the Virtual Fireplace. And right when that happened, within hours, my computer, I wasn't able to use my computer anymore. It's kaput. So I feel like the universe, the internet gods, whatever you want to call it, made me reflect on these times of COVID in a different way, and made me understand, reminded me of the importance of what we have in our hands as a technological generation, especially those of us that are either from indigenous communities or are in the process of reclaiming ourselves and decolonizing or resisting in some way, shape, or form. The internet now more than ever is a weapon that we can use to defend ourselves, and at the same time build community and have us all virtually congregate as a people in the virtual fireplace. I see a lot of similarity between the spirit world and the virtual world. You know, the spirit, the physical, and the virtual world are like different worlds, but I see so much similarity between the virtual world and the spirit world. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. And like within the context of COVID and the fear, right? Because we're talking death, we're talking suffering, we're talking fear, that feeling, that spirit that's moving, and the ways in which the internet affects that, right? So yeah, I have seen a shift in the way people use the internet. I have seen a shift in the way people are now questioning their position within American society. I've seen a lot of people wanting to pull out of the public education system. Like there's a lot of decolonizing going on in our houses, like without us really even talking about it big like that. But it's happening. We're coming back to that main central fireplace, the home, right? And so I think that we're in a unique time, even though the state and the powers, the colonial forces, the B, want to restrict our physical movement, want to continue desecrating the land, continue desecrating the sacred. What they cannot control and what they have absolute fear of is of our fires coming together. And this is the medium that can make it happen. Good morning.
Sold. Where do I sign up?
This is Shannon. I just want to add that movement rights works. It has really been instrumental in the way movement rights and our tiny presence on the internet, which continues to grow. ITIS has been helping movement rights and every step of the way, and really generating a lot of ideas for us on how we can continue to build that community. So just really grateful to ITIS and the work that she's been doing. I wonder, ITIS, if you want to share, I feel like there are still a lot of people who are, as Bryan said, now grandmas on the internet. And, and so especially, groups like 1,000 Grandmothers and all of these folks that have been putting themselves out there on the streets. I know in the Bay Area, the grandmothers are the ones who block the streets for the actions. And certainly that sort of thing is, happening around the world. And has been happening around the world. And now, of course, they're having to learn how to use the World Wide Web in new ways. And ITIS, I know that you have developed, some tools that, you've always sort of known that there are always new people to, to join this sort of, online, how to join the revolution online, not necessarily the online revolution. But maybe you could speak to that a little bit, and all of you as well. Like, what are your ways in for people who are still learning? For me, I'm learning to host Zoom webinars. So, so there you go. We're all learning. So maybe we could just talk about that sort of, intro anxiety and how to get involved online for the first time.
Sure. So a few years ago, when I came to Mexico, I had a crisis and I felt like this was before Trump. This was at the end of Obama. And I felt like there was this transition happening online. I saw a lot of people jumping into social media. I saw movements from environmental justice to family detention. I mean, you name it, everybody jumped on the internet bandwagon, right? And but I was seeing a lot of pages on Facebook, a lot of good attempts at connecting, right? But like when you create a page or something on Facebook, while you are creating community, you're not owning your information. And so I felt the need of like sharing those kinds of tips and packaging it together. And when I did that, I titled it Digital Resistance 101, and I put it out there just like as a total rascuacha informal publication, because I wanted to arm the next generation with the little bit of the roadmap that I saw in my time as I grew with the internet, right?
Explain rascuacha.
Rascuacha, well, you know, I come from the barrio. I still live in the barrio, and money is a thing, and money sometimes not a thing. So what I do, this web-based and internet work for me is also spirit work. So I follow my gut when creator tells me that I need to produce something like that book, and I produced it by any means necessary. It's not the most professional, it's not the prettiest, but it gets the word out, and most importantly, I get to chip away at the system. So that's what Rascuacha is, and it's called Digital Resistance 101, and it is an attempt at explaining in everyday terms for people who may not understand the internet and the different types of internet, right? Because that you can engage in the different spaces within the internet and the different tools. It takes you step by step over rethinking the internet. Rethinking the internet as when you create a space on there, that you're creating a virtual entity. You're creating like a person, like a digitized person, and that requires a full-blown personality. You need to be able to design something that moves emotion across a plastic or a glass screen. And how do you connect? How do you connect from one human to another enough so that someone takes action, signs a petition, sends a donation, goes to protest, right? And so like those kinds of questions, I package them into that book, and that's kind of like the basis of the work that I do now. So it's a mix of digital strategizing, but also a journey inward, because the communities that I've worked with have been in some sort of suffering. And the work that we all do here is bearing witness, right? Sometimes documenting really either violent or disturbing situations. And that's not something that you can just, I mean, I guess you could freely just release it on the internet, but it's raw and unfiltered pain. And, you know, there's a responsibility there in sharing that emotion across the screen. If we have such a marvelous tool, why would we want to share, you know, that feeling, that sentiment? We, as ceremony peoples, we have that responsibility too, to be aware of like what we're putting, the energy we're putting out there. And so when you're dealing with a crisis and you have limited funds, limited money, limited time, you're stressed, you're probably dealing with some form of PTSD, like what do you do? So this workbook takes you step by step to break it down and to put it out there. And that's, like I said, the foundation of what I do. But now I kind of bring that into this new post-COVID space, and I'm seeing that what has been created over the past couple of years now, and like with people like you, Bryan and Jennifer and Shannon, we're having ceremony. This is ceremony. This is sacred work. These are sacred conversations. These are real lives being affected by our use of this medium. So it's interesting also that now it's not just certain people that have that access. It's not just the so-called leaders, right? This is, kids have access to the phone now. Kids are on Facebook. I mean, they're on their own thing. Like everybody's connected now, right? So what do we do? What do we do, and how do we do it, right? And the only thing that comes to mind for me in this intersection of the sacred and the virtual of social justice, environmental justice, and now my reality, I have to, I feel that for me, the indication is to trust in my voice, because that's all I have is just that connection to you to speak. We're back to that sacred fire in here, and to connecting one-on-one and having these conversations and becoming more responsible and talking more to people and spreading, you know, the news and information we have to people. That's kind of where I see things are at. But what do you all think?
Do you want to add something, Jennifer?
I think just to kind of answer a little bit of Shannon's question about elders being on the internet now and being able to access that, and how do we deal with that? I think definitely it's kind of like a circle, right? Like my grandma is always leaning on me to help her navigate the online world. And so I think I kind of consider that which audience I'm talking to depending on our platform. Like sometimes I think our Facebook following is probably some of our elders, and then like Instagram might be more of our youth and younger people who are on Instagram and looking for something quick and easy. And I think about those kind of things when I'm organizing. IEN's definitely been trying to ramp up our radio stations as well, because we are living in a digital age, but a lot of our communities, particularly up north and our rural, actually don't have access to internet. So we're trying to address that also, and using traditional media as well as a way to reach people and educate people about what's going on and still hold on to that. So it's a lot to juggle to be able to accommodate everybody, but I think it's worth it, and getting those stories out there is just so important. So yeah, those are my 2 cents.
Can I respond, Shannon?
No. Yes.
No, just kidding. I'm gonna go anyway. I remember, like, and I think we're all of the age where we kind of grew up with the technology as it evolved, and for me, you know. I remember my grandfather being so fascinated with television, because that's technology that was introduced in his lifetime, and like he just loved to watch television and all these old movies. But for me, it was video games, right? I had Commodore 64, I think was the first system that I played on. Then the Atari, Nintendo, Sega, you know, and for me, like growing up with that, I always thought of like technology as something that was like private and mine. You know, I felt kind of safe and secure because I grew up with this, and it was often like an alternative to going outside. And it's hot in Houston, and I loved being outside. I did, but as you get older, you know, your interests change, and I became fascinated with technology, and I became, you know, intrigued with the ability to interact with like a machine, right? It wasn't even a person. Like it was much more fun if you could compete against someone, but if you didn't have someone else to play with, the computer would play with you. That's weird. but but it was something that was real, right? And that was kind of what I grew up with. So it became, I think, for a lot of folks my age, now I'm in my 40s, and you know that was a refuge. And of course, you know, in high school, I think the internet started to come out in the 90s more publicly. And by the time I was in college, you know, it had become more widespread. I don't think many folks had it at home yet, but by 2000, when I graduated, like, bam, it hit. And I even remember from one semester to the next, like, the entire campus went from a handful of people having cell phones to everybody having cell phones. And so that relationship with technology, you know, I had to reevaluate that. It completely changed. It wasn't something that was like private anymore, and something that I did, you know, when I didn't have other people to play with, or I didn't want to go outside. But now it was something that could, you know, bring everyone together, or it was a way to sort of connect with even more people that weren't physically there, even in the same room with you. And that was first experienced by me again with a video game. It was I think Warcraft, where you could actually like compete with other people as they were sitting in their living room, playing the same game, and you're playing against each other in real time. So it's interesting how technology changes, and now young kids and youth, like, they just grew up with it. It's just a natural thing. And so I think there's pieces that are missed, right? And that's where, like, the work that Iris did was so important, because she saw that, there would be a time when folks would have questions about how all this even came up, and what are the dangers and what are the risks that could be or should be discussed. What are we giving up? Where's this information going? Who has it? Who has access to it? Who owns it? All of those things. And if you grow up with something, like, it's kind of hard to ask those questions after the fact. They just become such a normal part of your everyday experience that, unless it's something that's of interest to you specifically, then, and you're curious, you just kind of accept things. Like radio, like, I still don't understand radio. There's a lot of technologies I don't understand, even internet and, all of that. But it works, it happens, I accept it. And there's, I think a danger in us not thinking about that. And I know right now, and I saw in the comments, folks are really concerned about even more technologies that are coming up. And with COVID, there's also, some danger in tracking people's every move. So, these are questions that are easier to ask as the technology is being rolled out and introduced. And I hope, that as our grandma and grandparents get online, that, it's helping spawn these conversations. Because yeah, I think we've all seen, like, everyone's parents, like, trip out on Facebook, like, whoa. It's like, everyone can see that, right? I don't care.
I have a question about armchair activism. And it's sort of like voting as to democracy. Like, there's been the perception for many people that the petition, signing petitions online, is, yes, we should all sign the petitions, but we also have to be out in the streets and all of these other things. So my question is sort of twofold, which is about getting creative. So one, what are the most effective sort of tools for, for bringing people together and online, and also in talking with folks like David Solnit from Art and Revolution, and Brooke Anderson, the movement photographer, who's been putting out these amazing resources for folks how to take pictures of car actions. Like, there's still this need to be seen and be out on the streets. And so on the one hand, my question is, how are we feeling about what armchair activism looks like these days? And has there been like a shift? And also, how do we engage? What are the best ways to engage while still recognizing that there is and will continue to be a need to be out in public and in the streets in some way? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I'd love to start with Jennifer.
Sure. I think right now armchair activism is really all we have if we're serious about protecting our communities and not spreading COVID around during this pandemic. I've seen people have car actions, I personally think that armchair activism, I'm not sure how I feel about that term, but I think it's a good on-ramp for some people who are trying to learn and might not feel as comfortable just showing up at an action outside of what we're currently living in. I've seen, like, we've utilized petitions a lot lately. There's been a lot of petitions since we've all gone into shelter in place. And to be honest, I'm not a huge petition fan. I've worked for some politicians, and I know that it's very easy to tune out a petition or not pay attention to a petition. And some politicians don't even check their own emails. They have their secretary do that for them. So it's not my favorite type of action in armchair activism. I have seen, like, I have had success with like phone bombing people and just like calling into their offices. We actually had one yesterday where we were asking people to support the Oglala Sioux and Cheyenne River Sioux tribes by calling in to Governor Nome's office. And that went pretty well, because then they stopped answering the phone. And you cannot ignore a ringing phone that is just ringing all day and just will not stop. It definitely brings attention. I've used that tactic also when we're trying to get people out of detention, or they take somebody, and we'll just call into ICE, and ICE is actually even disconnected phone numbers because so many people were calling in. Wow. So it's definitely a way to get attention during this time. And I think also something to consider is, I know for me, somebody who works in communications, I have kind of been after work tuning out of the internet, because there's just so much about COVID going around that I've noticed I need to take breaks also. So I think armchair activism is important right now. I definitely see it continuing to evolve into other stuff. Twitter storms are another great way to bug people. For the people's bailout, we had a Twitter storm where we all tweeted at President Trump because we all knew how much he loved Twitter. And so he was likely to be annoyed by us blowing up his Twitter. So those are some armchair activism we've been using right now. We also did some virtual banners where we had everybody take a photo of themselves with a letter and then pieced it all together for the KXL action. And I felt like that was a cute idea to also show that we're still all working together, even though we're staying home to protect our people. We're trying to, still keep our issues front and center.
Bryan, you have thoughts? Thank you, Jennifer.
Oh, I lost my thought for a second there. Tell me the question again, Shannon, because I got lost in my thoughts, and I did have something I wanted to share, though. Say it again.
So about the idea of not necessarily armchair activism, because it wasn't necessarily like the most positive term that the climate justice sort of, spoke about that, even though of course we all recognize, because we recognize it as a beginning place, not as the total sum. Like I said, like voting to protect democracy. It's like, of course, doing that. So, so thoughts on the rise of what are the creative ways that people are using this to continue to be felt, to connect to each other, and to be active, and how do we use it to amplify the very different ways that people are continuing to do, let's say, street protests in cars and those sorts of things, and how do we how do we best, what are some of the creative ways to be online and still deeply rooted in climate justice?
I know what tripped me up is because my focus was not so much how to project out into the world, because I feel like there's so many folks that are, for the first time, really experiencing the internet, that that goes beyond just social media platforms. And there's so much there, and one of the beautiful things that I remember early on in college was like audiobooks, um, podcasts. They weren't called these things back then, of course, but lectures. And just the incredible wealth of information that exists online. And so for me, to get to that point where folks can be creative at, targeting certain politicians or laws, or whatever they're feeling at the moment, I think it's important for folks to understand how to process their feelings. And so you can learn. There's so much you can learn about, that's available online. You can access full libraries. You can even read books online and go directly to the sources. So I think for me, my own personal praxis has been to just really look for information and get good or get better at trying to determine what's a good source, what's a bad source, and just to kind of better understand the whole layout of everything that's being put out there. And then that gives me ideas on how to be creative and different and new, right? How to come up with tactics that are fresh or fun. Fun is important for me. Like, you got to have joy in the work that you do. I think if your work is projecting anger, then it is much easier for people to just kind of push it aside. That's obviously like a tactic. Sometimes you want to piss people off, and that's deliberate, right? But sometimes you want people to notice, and really think about their own point of view in a different way. And to do that, you got to be clever. You gotta really understand who that person is. So just like there's a lot of information that we freely give online that's available, there's information about our targets too that's freely available and online. And I love to look at LinkedIn because I get to see who's looking at my profile. And sometimes you'll see like Department of Defense, or some high ups with the oil and gas companies. It's like, wow, they're checking me out. It's like, what are they doing? So then I was like, okay, who are you? What do you do? And so I think that's the first step. Really understand the access that you do have online, and then be smart about how you project what you want to project out there. So those tactics that we're seeing online, they're interesting, right? They're fun, they're cool, and they engage with a lot of people. But yeah, I think we don't have to just do one type of thing. There's always new stuff that's emerging, and I think the more people are engaging in that, the more ideas come out of it. So that's kind of how I approach it, Shannon, and love to hear from Iris and her thoughts. And what are the differences too in the capacity and space? Because you're in, would you consider your area like a rural part of Mexico, semi-rural, suburb? What what do you call that?
I'm in the Metroplex of Guadalajara, so here they call it Pueblo, but it ain't no Pueblo.
No, it's not New Mexican Pueblo, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it's a all-out city, and like in this little Pueblo is 4.5 million people. But interesting. I remember the first time someone said that I was an armchair activist. This was like 2004 or 5. I was like seriously offended. Like, what are you talking about? And I didn't know what that meant. And I spent years like trying to figure that out and wondering if like, is that good? Is that bad? Like, what does that mean? What am I doing? Like, what am I doing? And what is that? Does it really have an effect? Right? I got into organizing right before the big immigration rights marches of 2000. And so I got to see the shift in a lot of things there too. And at that time, that was when they called me that, and I was like, oh, that's such a slur. But I stuck with it. And now, in this time when we're all forced into this space, I'm trying to not associate it with the negative feeling, right? And understand that instead, what we're looking at is for the opportunity to people to take some sort of action. And I completely hear you, Jennifer, about the petition thing. I think that was like desde cuando, old technology. But what I hear in y'all's stories, and what I'm also experiencing, like in a more broad sense, is resistance creation resistance, right? Like there's this element of no one wrote the book for us. No one told us, oh, this is how you take down the system. You know, so a lot of us, like, we will experiment things, we'll experiment campaigns, we'll try this media, we'll try that media, and we're just like in this production mode, see where it hits, right? Where is the virality at? Where is that? And I think that what I feel has happened is that we're in this very interesting place as a generation. We're in this resistance community phase where now, yes, there's the illness and the suffering is still there, but what we're creating is not coming necessarily from that place. Like, we're creating something that, if it does convey pain, it also conveys something sacred, or it also conveys some sort of uplifting message, or message that makes people want to take action, right? So I'm seeing that as a generation, we're moving into a different space, and that while we can definitely get all the petitions signed, and we can definitely engage in Twitter storms, I think that's awesome, because they can't control it. That creation side of things, to me, highlights the importance of bringing the arts into everything that we're doing, in social justice, into the documenting. It's what I call the 3 Ds of digital resistance: document, digitize, and disseminate, right? We have to document our stories, because we know what happens when someone else writes the books. We have to digitize it, because if we have access to that technology, that's our indicator number 1. It's our responsibility to secure it for the following generations. We know what it's like to have our books burned. Disseminate. We have to get that story, that message out in as many ways as possible, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, PDF, JPEG, music, whatever. And all of those places, like, there's room for everybody to help. And if, let's say, it could be like one of my most successful, I guess you could say successful projects, was a art collaboration where letters from inside the child detention centers in Texas were smuggled out. And we worked with Culture Strike out in California, and teams of artists that then drew pictures to the kids' letters that got smuggled. And it ended up displaying for a week at the United Nations. And me as a person, in exile, because I'm not in the States for a reason, which is a whole other story, but in exile, from behind a screen in a remote place in Mexico, had something to do with that.
Bam.
That made me realize that we all have power, and that it may or may not be a question of money. Sometimes it's a question of ganas, which translates to like the will to do it, you know? So I think that I welcome everybody who wants to support the projects that we're a part of. And there's more than one way to help. And if there's artists out there, hit up our organizations, our efforts. Artists, we need you. Musicians, we need you. All the creative surge, that creative energy, let's harness that and let's throw that out there, because if we already are conscious of the fact that this internet is a virtual, what have we put that fire, that creation fire, you know? And me, I speaking as someone that was not born into my tradition, that comes from detribalized, missionized peoples that is now living in Mexico outside of the mass messaging and shock doctrine of the United States. Like, I have a different perspective. And I can tell you too that this power that I'm talking about, every internet using person has in the United States, for some reason, well, obviously we know why, it's just to shock you all into not being able to think critically. The messaging is incredibly intense, and the feelings that you see through the news, through the media online, is incredibly negative, and it's incredibly overwhelming. So it's like, well, what do you do if you're inside the belly of the beast? How do you do that? Because, like, as you're still a human being too, and you're still seeing suffering, and you feel that. It's our people, these are our communities, you know. So while we also are dealing with that creation and taking that armchair activism to the next level, we need to think about our spirit, and also know that we need to always take it back to the earth. Always take it back to the earth. This medium gives us a lot of electricity, a lot of electric charge. Sometimes it's, you know, we can do our work online, and we need to get outside and go put our feet in the soil, literally. 10, 15 minutes. Sorry, the babies. But let the mama take that energy, so that also with the things that you're filtering doesn't stay stuck in the physical body. You know, self-care is resistance too. And so it's a question of managing, balancing out that virtual stuff with the physical stuff, with the spiritual stuff. You know, because Western mindset likes to take the spirit out of things. And so we're not talking about the spirit of the internet, but we're not Western here, you know? So just want to circle back up and take it back to that place.
I have a question about, you know, sort of when the world, thank you all for that, answering those really tough and many-pronged question. So my next question is really about, well, things like the EPA rollbacks and things that have been happening under our noses during COVID, from the federal government, from state governments, outlawing, you know, public protests, which of course doesn't include those protesting the right to go to the hairdresser, and go to your pizza parlor. But for the climate justice movement and our activism that has been in the streets and putting our bodies on the line and things like that, how do we, you know, what about all these, you know, environmental rollbacks? What about the new reality of the economy that we're facing? What are your thoughts on, you know, I think we're all grappling with this question. What do we do about all of those things that have been happening under our noses while we've been sort of, you know, closed and cocooned in our, you know, self-isolating communities? And that's open to anyone.
I'll jump in because I thought of something, and it was your word, cocoon. But I'm like Edie's. I didn't grow up with my traditions specifically, right? I think there's a lot that has been preserved in our families and our cultures, particularly for Mexican American communities in the Southwest, that is just not identified or named as such. For survivability reasons. But I remember the first sweat that I went into, and I felt very vulnerable, right? Because I realized that I was in a place where, you know, folks could see that people were in there and engaged in ceremony and very focused, you know, inside. And for the first 30 minutes, like, I kept thinking about people outside of the sweat, outside of the space, and what they could do to me. And, you know, to answer your question, I think right now, you know, what's most important is to really focus on what you can do on the inside, right? And it's that healing that's so important that Edie just spoke of. And, you know, using this moment, there's a lot going on all the things you mentioned, all the things that were going on prior to this, all of your fears, you know, and doubts about the future, even before COVID. Um, but, you know, while you're in that cocoon, you know, take that time and really appreciate it, you know, appreciate the space and the ability to do this. Like the whole world is on shutdown and you're not expected like to go out and join the rat race. Like, don't complain about it. Fucking enjoy it. Use the time wisely. And an elder from the Houston area, you know, kind of told me that. I didn't realize what she was saying at the time, but she said we should thank them, you know, because they've given us time to connect with spirit. And I think that's something that we can all do right now. Yeah, check.
Jennifer or Iris, any thoughts on um, what's next?
Well, I think right now is a good time to also educate yourself and learn about all of these rollbacks and about who you're going to vote for. I hesitate to say to focus on voting because I don't think that voting is necessarily harm reduction for all communities.
Mm.
I know it is for some, but I think that a lot of people are left out because of the systems. It's hard to work within these systems that are making us so sick. Like capitalism is definitely the illness over COVID and has created COVID and opened up the door to COVID. And I think right now, since we are in this time of cocooning, it is a good time to educate ourselves about these systems that are trying to crush us, that we might not know too much about, but we have all this time on our head right now and are in our hands right now to look into this and take a deeper look and really look within how these systems are not really serving you, and educate yourself so that you emerge from this new reality more educated and ready to hit the streets and talk about these things and educate other people. It's something we don't talk about too much. And I see a note here from Shannon. So I'm going to try to work this into what I'm talking about. But this is a time for change. For IEN, we've kind of had to take a step back and look at the work we're doing right now and how we can best serve our people right now. And we've actually partnered with Bryan and T.E.A.S and Shannon at Movement Rights, and we're all working to provide protective masks to Indigenous communities. We've shipped out 38,000 so far to communities that of need across the country, and it's kind of a way that we can help each other. And I know that there's places also like the Pueblo Action Alliance who have an open call for seamstress. So I personally cannot sew a straight line for the life of me, but I'm sure that there are people out there who are looking for a way to help people. And I know Pueblo Action Alliance is desperate for homemade masks right now for the Pueblos that they're serving in the Southwest. And so that's a way to also keep working towards these communities and working on yourself and still empowering people and helping people come out healthy, so that when we're ready to come out and hit the ground, we're all more educated, we're healthy, we helped each other, we have a stronger bond together even through this. We're ready to hit the ground running. Oh, and you can check out what we're doing at protectthepeoples.org. That was the whole point of that.
And the link is in the chat. Yeah.
That's awesome, Jennifer. I actually want to piggyback off of what you just said, because as a person from the context of the United States, now living in Mexico, I do see the difference in the social fabric. I do see the difference in the messaging, and in particular this moment. I can tell you that here, the traditional American capitalism ain't got nothing. It doesn't stand a chance against the Posteca culture, the indigenous trade that is here in Jalisco, that has always been here all the way up through Texas, all the way up to Canada. We have been here. That trade line is established. That is written into the fabric of our blood, and that will never stop. What I can tell you that I have seen, through the quarantine here in Mexico, yeah, the government, the stores shut down, but there is a trade that happens from family to family. You can buy your food from your neighbors. You can go across the street and get anything you need. Like I cannot say that I have been without as of yet, thank creator. But the fabric here is so tight. And now with this move to the internet, because they also shut down their schools and everybody's now getting on the internet, it's like this movement to digitize here. I mean, I literally WhatsApp when I need food, I can WhatsApp somebody and they'll bring it to my door in like minutes, and it's local. And seeing, coming from the United States, where those community networks have been dismantled intentionally by the system, or over-regulated, or over paperwork, you know, with so much paperwork just to register your business. All that's intentionalness to dismantle that community, that connection that we have to each other. So I think it's interesting that that virus shuts down that capitalism, but that trade and that network doesn't. It's still there, you know. And I think about that a lot in my work too, because, you know, I'm connected to the United States networks, and I'm connected to what's happening to you all over there. I feel it, you know, I know I was there. And so I asked myself, like, what is the next step? Like, how do we move to the next phase of things, you know? And so I think that one thing is for sure, I think that this call back to the interior of ourselves, like, is taking back the land in a metaphorical and a physical sense. Like, take back your land. Let's start by taking back our land. Let's take the stress out, cut out the negative messaging. If we need to limit our internet time, so be it. We need to be, our spirit needs to be right. Restoring that fireplace at our home with our relationships and our family. And most importantly, stepping outside and putting our feet in the soil. Because that's what this is all about too. They don't, you know, these rollbacks with EPA and them knowing about the COVID and all that, they know that they're fully aware of the physical limitations that are being placed upon us, right? And so we, you know, one thing I think about is someone from Texas that in light of COVID, they reopened the state, and the pipeline is going through the enchanted forest in central Texas at the same freaking time. My people, we come from medicine peoples. That's forest, that enchanted forest is part of the route to get to the medicine gardens, the sacred hikuri that's in South Texas. This is something that affects all of us. And, you know, it's overwhelming. It's like, what do you do? Well, you know what? Like, I can tell you, when I'm done this conversation, I'm going to go outside, I'm going to put my feet in the soil. Now I'm going to ask the mother and go back to taking the original instructions back through a direct conversation with the earth. You know, like I was saying earlier, there's no playbook. We're all stepping into new territory together at the same time. And so I think that that's all the more reason that we need, as they physically cut us off, we need to build our relationships closer virtually and also to the land. They don't want us to talk to the land. They don't want us to hear her voice. And what's funny is that because everybody's inside, she's singing louder. So it's a good time to go chat with her. And that's what I think the big step that each of us should take individually, and then we'll get our messages and our cues from her. That's what all I have to say.
I think that's kind of everything to me, because you know, the reason that we decided to put forward this webinar on the Virtual Fireplace and Indigenous-led Multimedia Activism is because that in the climate justice movement, it really is that the Indigenous people have been leading, and that path is about connecting us back to Mother Earth. And for those of us who are part of settler populations and who don't have that direct connection, you know, we gratefully acknowledge also, the land whose land we're on, and how to actually learn to stand in solidarity and action with our Indigenous and people of color communities, the people who feel the brunt first and most deeply, and the people whose connection to the earth can help us heal the planet and connect ourselves in ways that we all once really shared. And so that virtual fireplace takes us back to earliest times of connecting with each other around a fire, and having that personal connection. And I really thank the three all-stars here of people who are really helping us maintain that connection in this special time. And I think, Bryan, for also burning medicine while we've been on this call, and to T.E.J.A.S for bringing her child into, this is all about, we all get to do this in new ways, and for, and to Jennifer, who, hey, I think that you said this is the first time you put on makeup in like weeks.
Probably, like, I don't think I have since COP. So.
Right. So, these are the folks who are figuring out also for all of us how to maintain that connection. This isn't just a digital machine thing. I mean, it can be, of course, but there's so much more available. And I want to thank you all for sharing your deep wisdom on this topic and for bringing us together around the virtual fireplace. And I want to say
one thing before you shut it down.
I wanted to just, I wanted to just share a screen for a second to Protect the People's website. People can go there. The difference, I think, between this partnership for providing, providing a place to take action is that we sit on Zoom every week and figure out how to get the masks and what communities to send it to. And none of us are, this isn't Red Cross, like there isn't anybody, getting paid for. We provide the masks that people make donations on this page, and we put it in the hands of the medics, Indigenous medics and communities most in need. And I also want to thank IEN for really leading that effort as well. But we have lots more, many more masks and other PPE to share. So now I'm trying to figure out, as we're all learning this technology, how to stop screen sharing so that I can give, let's see, how do I hand this over to Bryan? Bryan, if you just start talking.
Up to the top. Yeah. I was just gonna say, as we all come out of our sweat, our metaphorical sweat in our homes, that we should come out of that space not fearful, and not scared in any way, but we should be cleansed. We should be ready for it. And I think, that's what I would hope that folks are left with, as they think about, don't think too much about, if you think too much about what's going to happen after, like you're going to be met with anxiety and fear and stress. No, just focus on yourself, on the inside, express yourself, your gratitude, connect with the earth, communicate with the earth, celebrate with your family, protect each other, and you'll be ready. You'll be ready. Whatever happens when this is all said and done, you'll know what needs to happen next, and we'll all be in a good place, and it will end. This isn't gonna go on forever. There have been many pandemics throughout the history, as we all know very well. So yeah, thank you, Shannon, for putting this together, and thank you all for joining, all of the participants, and again, Jennifer and T.E.J.A.S, it's good to see y'all.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody, really appreciate your words. We'll share this out tomorrow. It'll be available for, you know, on YouTube, and you guys can, I'll share it with all of you who are listening. We'll send you an email with the link to all of that. And I thank you all for your participation and for all of your positive and inspiring ideas. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.